So again, welcome everybody to this morning's Family Caregiving webinar. My name is Carrie McClellan. I'm the Outreach Manager for ElderHelp, and I'll be helping to facilitate the webinar. And I will introduce our speaker in just a moment, and we'll go ahead and get started. So just a little bit about ElderHelp and who we are and why we do these webinars. So our organization really helps to support seniors who are still living in their own home out in the community, wanting to maintain their independence, but perhaps looking for additional support to be successful in that. And a lot of times when we are working with seniors, we are also in communication with family caregivers and family members who are worried about their aging loved ones or looking for resources that might be able to offer additional support. So it kind of goes hand in hand. We offer a variety of different programs, and of course during COVID those have been modified to really focus on the most essential needs. We are working on our plan and starting to resume some of our in-person services, but otherwise we are helping to deliver food and essential items, rides to medical related appointments, a lot of check-in calls, housing services, coordinating different affordable housing options, and then our family caregiver support. So through our family caregiver support program, we offer a lot of information and referral, connecting people to resources and different benefits and helping them understand what might be available. We also offer these webinars, and we are very fortunate to have great partnerships, including with Alzheimer's San Diego, who is joining us today for our webinar, in addition to Southern Caregiver Resource Center. So we all kind of work collectively to try and support family caregivers in our community at whatever level they might be experiencing their family caregiving journey. We've also created online courses for family caregivers, and those are all available at no cost. They're accessible through our website, elderhelpofsandiego.org, or directly through elderhelp.thinkific.com. And there's 5 different courses and have a lot of helpful assessment tools and resources and education to help people through that journey. So I encourage anybody who might be interested to check those out, and whether it's something that you might be interested in or you know somebody that could benefit, and you can share that information. The more people that know about it, the better, so that they have that extra support. So I'm very excited about today's webinar and introducing our speaker, Amy Abrams with Alzheimer's San Diego. The topic, driving and memory loss, is one that kind of came out of our last webinar that we partnered on last month, which is living with memory loss. And I know driving, there are so many different aspects and so many different questions that come up from individuals as well as family members. So I'm really looking forward to today's topic, and I know that you'll learn a lot, so that will be helpful. Just to introduce Amy the proper way. So Amy Abrams has worked in the field of long-term care in San Diego for 20 years in care management, dementia care, and community health education. She holds a joint Master of Social Work and Master of Public Health from San Diego State University, and is a certified positive approach to care dementia trainer. Amy is a longtime member of the Aging Life Care Association and serves on the board of directors for the National Academy of Certified Care Managers. She is a passionate educator and vocal advocate for aging and disabled adults, and currently serves as the Director of Education for Alzheimer's San Diego, a local nonprofit organization whose mission is helping families today while finding a cure for tomorrow. And I think we all, if you've heard Amy speak before, you can attest to that. She's definitely passionate and has a great wealth of information and knowledge to share with us. So Amy, welcome. Thank you so much for joining today. And I will pass over the reins in just a moment.
Okay, that sounds good.
I did just want to
yeah, the passing of the remote control is always the greatest challenge of these webinars that we have. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Carrie, for inviting us to come and be a part of this program, for requesting this specific topic in follow-up to our most recent program. As you mentioned, driving is one of the key issues. I sometimes refer to it as one of those hornet's nest issues for people who are coping with a new diagnosis and their care partners. It's a really important one. And I really appreciate that we've set this up and that everybody is here today. I am going to go through this set of slides, the content of the program. I'll go straight through, and during that time, please feel free to submit your questions via the chat. Carrie will be keeping tabs on those, and then if there are questions that I didn't answer by the end of the program, we will have some time at the end to address some of those. So I do look forward to that very much. So let's see if my slide advancing is going to work. It did. Terrific. Okay. So here's a quick look at the information that I plan to cover during the webinar here today. I'm going to talk briefly about dementia. Dementia being one of the primary reasons that people experience memory loss as they're aging. Certainly not the only reason, but of course, I'm the Director of Education at Alzheimer's San Diego. So dementia is the specific cause of memory loss that I'm here to talk about and to focus on here today. But do know that whether you are a person who's living with a diagnosis of dementia, a care partner or a caregiver to somebody who is, or there is no diagnosis, you just know that there are some changes going on, but no specific diagnosis has been made. All of this information is pretty relevant to everyone. So I'll talk about how dementia affects a person's ability to drive safely. We'll talk about when it's time to intervene, either to make a decision to stop driving on one's own or to support someone else in making that decision, if possible, when to intervene. And then we'll talk through some of the ins and outs of working with the doctor, what the laws are here in California about that, working with your doctor as a partner on this issue, not an adversary, and working with the DMV. Sort of understanding what your rights are as a driver, but also how the process works. And then of course, I will make sure that we talk about local resources that are available here in San Diego County related to driver safety, as well as evaluation resources, and very importantly, what alternatives exist if you are no longer driving. Okay, whoops. So let's start with sort of a general definition of this term dementia that I've already used. To be clear, Alzheimer's disease is a type of dementia. It's the most common type of dementia, but it is only one cause of this group of symptoms that we refer to as dementia. So that word refers to a syndrome, a group of symptoms caused by something else that causes changes in a person's memory, changes in their overall cognitive function, how they think, how they process information, and very importantly to the topic that we're covering here today, dementia affects a person's visual spatial abilities and often causes behavior changes. So specifically, how dementia affects a driver. There's lots of different ways. And again, let me just step back for a moment and say dementia is only one of many conditions that might affect a person's ability to drive safely as they age, right? Of course, we've got vision changes, hearing changes, changes in our overall physical flexibility and mobility, changes in our reflexes, right? Our reflexes slow down a little bit as we age. And of course, there are normal age-related memory and cognitive changes that we're all going to experience. So again, I just want to emphasize dementia is what I'm focusing on here today, but may not be the reason or the only reason that driving is becoming a safety concern for someone. So having said that, how does dementia affect a person's ability to drive safely? Of course, it causes memory problems. So if you are behind the wheel navigating on your way to a familiar location, or could even be an unfamiliar location, and while driving, you experience some rapid forgetting, some short-term memory loss, and don't remember that this is your exit, this is the place where you're supposed to turn, right? Distracted driving is very dangerous, as we all know, as we hear all the time. And a person who's experiencing short-term memory loss while they are driving that results in difficulty with navigation. This is an unsafe driving situation. Difficulty with orientation, if a person were to be driving and sort of lose their sense of time, space, where they were going, where they are right now. This is clearly not a safe situation. Judgment, this is a tricky one and a very important one. When there's damage in the frontal lobes of the brain, when there are changes in that region of the brain, one of the common impacts is that it changes a person's ability to sort of take in information and make good decisions with it, right? So it's kind of like that region of the brain is a little bit like the CEO of your brain. It's the decision maker. It's also the part of your brain that allows you to have insight into your own abilities. And so one of the common challenges of Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia is that a person, even if they are aware that they have the diagnosis, and they're not always aware that they have the diagnosis, because of course a person may forget that they've received that diagnosis, right? Insight is a great challenge in these conditions. So if you are experiencing difficulty with judgment, difficulty with insight, it can be very hard to know how you're doing as a driver, right? You don't have a good sort of ability to self-assess your own skills, your own abilities. You may be forgetting that there have been incidents recently where you had a little accident or a near accident. You may forget about that moment that you were lost driving in your own neighborhood for a good amount of time. If you don't remember that that happened, right, it's very difficult for you to have insight into maybe it is time for me to consider not driving. So this is why we have objective third-party resources for evaluating a person's ability to drive safely. So we'll talk about that as we go along here. But a very important issue to be aware of. Changes in a person's personality and behavior will often affect the way that they drive. Right? A person may become more aggressive. They may become more passive. Either way, both can be a hazard on the road, right? Driving does require this careful balance of being assertive while not being aggressive toward other people. And if a person is having difficulty kind of regulating their emotions, which is a common symptom in dementia, that can be a hazard behind the wheel as well. Sensory changes are common in dementia, and in particular, not just hearing, but the changes to the visual field are very common in people who are living with various types of dementia. So we'll see a shrinking of the peripheral field of vision, and clearly you need a good wide field of peripheral vision in order to drive, right? You're not just looking through a tunnel. You're not just looking through your windshield even, right? You're looking through all of those windows. You are using mirrors, you're using your peripheral vision when you are checking blind spots, right? You're not just looking straight ahead. So when there are changes to a person's field of vision as well as to their hearing, dementia affects a person's hearing not so much in the structure of the ears don't change, but your brain is what really does the hearing, right? Your ears take in the sensory information, but your brain tells you what it was. Right? So if you're driving a car and you are maybe able to hear a siren, but you aren't able to tell where in space it's coming from, right? Because that orientation is off, or your brain isn't making that clear connection for you, that's an emergency vehicle. You need to get over as quickly as possible. This can produce an unsafe set of conditions. So all of these different conditions, possible symptoms, I should say, as well as the unfortunate reality that Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia are progressive, right? They don't improve over time. We have medications that can help kind of slow down or delay the progression of the disease, but we don't yet have true cure or treatment for these conditions. So all of that is to say we have to be thinking ahead and planning ahead for a time that we're no longer driving. Driving and dementia, clearly a very important public health issue. So with or without dementia, older drivers, people over the age of 75, as the statistic on this slide shows you, have an increased risk of collision over people under age 75 for every mile that they drive. So it isn't just dementia that affects a person's ability to drive safely. And I hope you'll hear that important message. No matter who you are, no matter what age you are, no matter how safe your driving record is or how long your driving record is, we all need to be thinking now about sort of planning ahead for a time that we may not be able to drive. Most of us, dementia or not, are going to outlive our ability to drive safely. So thinking ahead about your transportation options is really important for everyone who is attending here today. So not only are we more likely to have collisions as we age, we're more likely for those collisions to result in fatalities, as you see in that second bullet point there. So take those facts about the risks of driving as we age and add to that the fact that age is the primary risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and most other types of dementia. Consider that 1 in 9 people over the age of 65 right now in the United States is living with dementia. That means we have a lot of people currently driving who are living with dementia. Not to say that they are all unsafe, as we'll talk about. A person can drive safely in the early stages of dementia in many cases, but these are situations we need to be thinking ahead about and planning ahead for. So how do we know when it is unsafe? So I have sort of 2 sets of signs here for you. The first set here, these are signs that one might observe in oneself as a driver, right? Decreased confidence behind the wheel. So asking other people to do the driving, you know, I used to always love to drive, but now I'd really prefer that you do that. If you're starting to lean on other people because of a change in your confidence level, that may be an indication. You find that you are experiencing poor lane control, drifting, you catch yourself sort of drifting out of your lane more often than you used to, inappropriate speed, that can go either way. The thing about inappropriate speed is when we're younger, we tend to drive too fast. As we age, we tend to drive too slow. And in particular, if you're driving with dementia, we frequently see people driving very, very slowly because their brain is processing information more slowly. They need the car to go more slowly so that they can take in the signage that they're reading, right? Take in the information more slowly. Difficulty navigating turns if you're, you know, sort of jumping, you're hitting curves as you are turning corners, taking them too widely or too narrowly. This is an indication that there might be some of those visual spatial changes going on. Remember those behavioral changes that are common in dementia. If you find that you are more easily angered behind the wheel, getting impatient, getting irritated with other drivers, of course, you know, we all, that some of that is just a normal part of daily life. But if you're finding there's more road rage, you're getting more confused, more agitated while you drive, this may be a sign that driving is becoming unsafe or difficult for you. Generally just kind of making poor decisions, right? I didn't gauge correctly how far away that pedestrian was, and I sort of cut it close when I was turning right at that stop sign or that red light, for example. Changes to your response times, right? Our reflexes are very, very important when we are behind the wheel, and a slowing down of reflexes and just generally being able to think through what's the right response here. That can be a sign of unsafe driving. Errors at intersections, this is an interesting one, right? Obviously there's the knowing what to do with a red, yellow, or a green light is a part of that, but think about what happens when you approach a 4-way stop and all of the sort of unspoken complexities of human interaction that happen at that 4-way stop and how much you are relying on your ability to see other people, to interpret what they are doing or what they are about to do, making eye contact with each other, all of that unspoken, the subtle ways that we're communicating with each other at that 4-way stop, those are challenging and they can be very difficult for people with dementia to navigate. And so we find that they make more errors at intersections more broadly, not just with regard to red lights and green lights. So here, the second list, these are things that you might observe in another person. Now, I want to be clear that if you have concerns about another person's ability to drive safely, what I am not recommending that you do is get in the car with them, let them drive, and see how they do. If you're concerned about another person's driving, we want you to be concerned about your own safety as well. So these are things that you might observe sort of passively, things you would hear or see about, but you don't necessarily need to be in the car with the person to observe these, right? You notice that the car is parked inappropriately, right, in the driveway or outside of the house. The person is not able to sort of stay in a lane or stay on a driveway or in a parking space the way that they used to. Lots of new dings and scratches in a car, and especially if the person can't tell you where they came from. If you're hearing more and more, person comes home from a trip somewhere and is telling stories about near misses or close calls, or gosh, this person just in the parking lot just came out of nowhere, right? If you're hearing more and more of those stories, this is an indication that the person may be struggling with safety behind the wheel. Other people honking more frequently. We can notice this in ourselves, but we can also notice when someone else is telling us, gosh, other drivers are just getting so aggressive, right? More and more people are just honking all the time. But this San Diego County is, California generally is just not an environment. There are places, other places in the country, other places in the world where people use horns very differently while they drive. In California, it's not, you know, just used as a turn signal the way it is in some East Coast cities. So when people are honking, this usually means you've done something that startled them, that made them angry, that they weren't expecting you to do, right? So if other people are honking more often, this is a sign that something is changing in the way that you're driving. You notice that someone is feeling less confident, forgetting how to locate or navigate their way to familiar places, asking for directions to places that they've always known how to get to. This is an indication of potential unsafe driving. And finally, if somebody is just making a quick run to the store, you know, a quick visit to the kid's house in the next neighborhood, whatever it might be, a familiar location, a familiar route, and coming home much later than you would expect. That may be an indication that they've gotten lost on their way home. And remember that if a person is not reporting to you, I got lost, I had an incident, I hit a mailbox and that's where this ding or this scratch came from, the fact that they're not reporting it to you doesn't mean that they're lying to you, trying to cover up. It may very well be that they don't remember that this incident has happened. Importantly, wandering is a very common behavior, a very common risk in people who are living with dementia. Becoming disoriented, right? Confused in a moment of short-term forgetfulness. Every person who's living with any kind of dementia is at risk of wandering, no matter sort of what stage of the disease they're in, whether they drive or not. I think we think of wandering as something that happens on foot, but wandering absolutely happens in cars. It happens on public transit. It happens on airplanes. And here in a border city like San Diego, it happens if people can and do cross the border. So wandering while driving is a significant risk for people who are living with dementia and have access to a vehicle. So remember, the statistic is that 60% of people with dementia will wander. Anecdotally, though, we believe it's actually probably much higher. That's just really kind of what gets reported or what is understood officially as an incident of wandering. So people wander for a variety of reasons, right? They might be confused, might be disoriented. They might think they need to get to work. They need to pick up the kids, a memory of a familiar past activity from their life. They may be hungry. They may be going in search of someone or something, physical need, some kind of general discomfort, right? Or frequently it's just sort of general agitation, right? I'm not comfortable here. I need to do something else. I need to get out of here. Hopping in the car or just walking out the door in an attempt to sort of alleviate feelings of restlessness. So if you heard all of that, you read that, you heard that, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, yes, the signs are there. I need to consider giving up the car keys or modifying my driving, or I am very concerned about someone else and I need to intervene. What should you do? So we'll talk now about the what should you do. Before we do that, I always love to share this bit of humor from the great Dave Barry. The one thing that unites all human beings, regardless of age, gender, religion, economic status, or ethnic background, is that deep down inside, we all believe that we are above average drivers, sort of a universal truth of the, particularly the American driver. I think this is part of our, part of our underlying ethos. This is one of the main reasons that it's so difficult to initiate a conversation with someone about your concerns about their driving, because people take it as a deep insult to sort of who they are, the kind of person they are. Their skills, their abilities as a person are really tied up for a lot of us in our ability to drive and in the fact that we believe that we are safe drivers, right? Certainly for people who've had a very clean driving record, a good driving history throughout their lives, a lot of people take a lot of pride in that. And so the conversation that I'm concerned about your driving can be pretty devastating. This is an important thing for us to just sort of own and recognize before we initiate this conversation. So I really like to encourage people to work with your doctor as a partner in this. This gets really tricky for a couple of reasons. A, you might not have a really strong sort of working or familiar relationship with the doctor. I do understand that. If you do have, or the person that you're concerned about does have a good relationship with the doctor, they can be a wonderful partner in this. But there's also the element, the human element. Doctors are human beings also, and so they make mistakes. They have discomfort around talking about driving. They are legally bound. In the state of California, we have, and in many other states, not just here, doctors are bound to make a report when they make a diagnosis of what the DMV terms a dementing condition, along with some other types of medical conditions. They are duty bound to make that report. They don't make the report directly to the DMV, but we often say that the doctor is reporting you to the DMV. In truth, what's really happening, at least here in San Diego County, what's happening is that they're making that report to the county Department of Public Health. The Department of Public Health then is transferring that information over to the DMV if this person is a driver. That is a law here in California. It's not a personal judgment. The doctor does not need to think that you are an unsafe driver in order to make that report. They can 100% think you are still perfectly capable of driving. They've still got to make that report. That is a law. So important to know that, but also to recognize that doctors make mistakes, right? They may fail to make a diagnosis because they may not make a diagnosis because of this law. They don't want to have to make that report, right? They don't want to have to turn you in to the DMV, right? A lot of doctors have this sort of misinformation that that report is an automatic revocation of driving privileges, and that is not the case. We'll talk next about what happens on the DMV's side of things. But so doctors sometimes hesitate to make a diagnosis for that reason. They also sometimes just forget. Again, they're human, and so sometimes they forget to file the report, even though it is required of them. So know that the doctor can be a partner in this, can be a source of support. They're not your enemy, they're not your adversary in this, but they can make mistakes, right? So sometimes you have to push to get that report made, or you have to push for that conversation, or you have to sort of give gentle reminders that this needs to happen. But remember that a person's ability to retain their driving privileges is not about whether or not they have a diagnosis. It's about whether or not they are safe to drive. So a doctor making that report does not mean automatic revocation of driving privileges. They're going to make that report. They can include supplemental notes that say this person absolutely should stop driving immediately, or this person is still very functional and I believe they're safe to be driving independently. They can also make the report with no notes whatsoever and leave it totally in the hands of the DMV. They have lots of wiggle room with how they how they generate that report. So generally though, what I encourage you to do is collaborate with the doctor. The doctor can be a really wonderful source of support for having hard discussions with a patient who needs to give up driving but is struggling with that decision. If that patient, if that person really respects the opinion of their doctor, that news may come easier hearing it from them than from even a very loved and trusted member of the family. So remember that the doctor can be a support in this effort as well. Doctors sometimes can help family caregivers by providing reminders, writing it on a prescription pad. It's not an official prescription, but writing on a letterhead, writing a letter on letterhead, or providing something on a prescription pad that says, you know, Mrs. Abrams should not be driving, right? On this date, I made this diagnosis, and it is my recommendation that she not be driving. There's nothing legal about this. It's not a true medical order, but it can help if I'm struggling to remember. I'm grabbing the car keys, right? And my husband says to me, you know, Amy, the doctor said you shouldn't be driving, right? Here's her note, right? This could be a helpful sort of trigger or reminder for me. That won't work for everyone, right? You have to know what's going to be effective in your situation. One final note on this is that I've made the point that the doctor can't officially revoke one's driving privileges. It's the DMV and law enforcement who make those decisions about whether or not an individual person can stop driving. But a doctor absolutely can say to you, you know, you have this diagnosis. I do not think that you are safe to be driving. If they've had that conversation with you, that's in your medical record, right? There's a note somewhere in your medical record of that conversation having taken place. So even if you still have valid driving privileges, you've not lost your privileges because the DMV hasn't revoked your driver's license. If your doctor has said to you, I think you should stop driving, and you continue to drive, be aware that this is a huge risk in terms of your financial and legal liability. Should something happen and your insurance company gets wind, or the person you injure gets their insurance company gets wind that your doctor has told you you should not be driving, very likely they are not going to cover that incident. So it exposes you to a lot of risk to go against your doctor's recommendation on that. So let's talk now about what actually happens on the DMV side of things. So when the DMV gets that report, again, they don't just automatically revoke a person's license because a doctor filed that report, or even just because the doctor said that this person shouldn't be driving. They make a personal, individually based decision, I should say. There is no protocol for at a certain age, you have to be retested at every X number of years or months, or with this diagnosis, you have to be reevaluated every 3 months or every 6 months. This is a source of great frustration to many people, right? My loved one is 98 years old and just got their driver's license renewed for 3 years. I hear these types of frustrations all the time. But the fact is, you know, the DMV exists to protect our driving privileges for as long as possible. I know it doesn't seem like that to people who have had dealings with the DMV, but that is actually their orientation, to protect a person's driving privileges unless they are deemed to be unsafe. It is also not a situation where we discriminate against people based on their age. Just because you're 98 years old doesn't mean you're necessarily any less safe of a driver than me in my 40s, right? These things are very person specific. You can be a very skilled driver, still have very good eye-hand coordination and sensory abilities in your 90s, right? So they don't make, there's no firm protocols about how this is going to happen just based on your age or just based on a medical diagnosis. But absolutely, if they receive this report from the doctor, something is going to happen. So it might not be immediate and it may not be even visible to you. They're going to make a determination based on what they've heard, right? So based on when you are next due to renew, based on your driving history, if you've got a history of lots of accidents and moving violations, and then they get this report, they may be more inclined to bring you in for a reevaluation sooner rather than later. If they get that report The doctor has said you have very early memory loss. They're not concerned, but they have made a diagnosis, and they look and you've got a perfectly clear record and you're set to renew in another 6 months. You may hear absolutely nothing, right? So there's no standard response that you're going to get from the DMV. It is made on a person by person basis. So one thing, though, to be aware of, is a very helpful tool that family members, caregivers, friends, neighbors have at their disposal. If you are concerned about somebody's driving, the doctor's made the report and nothing happened, or the person doesn't have a diagnosis, and so there has been no report, any one of us, any concerned person can request that a person be reevaluated by the DMV. In the resources at the end of this slide deck that Carrie is going to email out to all of you, I have the name of that form, so you can find it easily on the DMV's website. Anyone can download this form, fill it out, send it in, and request that a person be reevaluated. It is not anonymous. You have to say who you are and what your relationship is to the person, but the DMV doesn't tell the person who made that report. The thing about this is the DMV isn't always going to act on that, right? They recognize that there are, neighbors who get into fights with each other and so report each other, or, they recognize that there's some room for misinformation there. But if they've got this paper trail, right, they've got multiple reports from multiple people and a doctor's report, and there's a recent incident, right, a speeding ticket or something. This is going to paint a picture for the DMV. So that request for reexamination is a very important tool that people can use to kind of create a paper trail or to express concern to the DMV about a person's ability to drive safely. So when this happens, typically a person isn't just sort of it's rare, but it does happen sometimes that they just issue a notice and the person has lost their driving privileges. That does happen in some extreme cases, but usually what happens is you get called in for an administrative hearing at something that's called the Office of Driver Safety. These are sort of nicer little DMV offices we have a few of them around the county. So you're not going to the big, awful DMV complex to go through this process. So if they're going to ask you to retake a written test, to do a driving test, or to do what's called a hearing, where they just want to have a conversation with you and hear your side of it, that's usually done at the Office of Driver Safety, not in a DMV office. So important also to know that it's not all just black and white. You can drive or you can't. They may do something where they just restrict your driving privileges. Well, based on what we've seen, we don't want you driving at night, or we don't want you driving on freeways, or we don't want you driving outside of this 5-mile radius around your house. Sometimes they will restrict a person's driving privileges rather than revoking them altogether. As I mentioned, it is law enforcement, CHP here in California, sheriff or the police, any police jurisdiction can revoke a person's driving privileges right there on the spot. If there's an incident and they think that person is unsafe, they have the ability to do that, and the DMV, not doctors, not anybody else. So just to make that perfectly clear. We do also have someone called the Senior Ombudsman, who is available if you are an older adult. I think the Ombudsman is available to anyone over age 65 here in California who feels that you've been unfairly treated by the DMV. You have this advocate. He is employed, actually, it used to be a he. I think the Ombudsman may be a woman right now. Forgive me, I forget the name of this person. There's one person who is sort of dedicated to all of Southern California, though, so it's a very busy person. And the Ombudsman is employed by DMV, but they're there to be an advocate for the driver who has concerns as an older driver. So again, I have in the slide deck, in the resources, information about how to find that person. So as I mentioned before, a third-party evaluation might be really helpful, right? Because we, as the driver ourselves, may not have a good objective view of the situation. I too, as a family caregiver to someone else, to my loved one, to a neighbor or a friend that I'm concerned about, I also may not have the most accurate view of their driving. How often am I really in a car with them? How accurate is my perception of their driving abilities? So do know that there are what are called certified driver rehabilitation specialists. These are usually occupational therapists by background. And we have here in San Diego County, we have a couple through the major hospital systems, Sharp, Tri-City, and Scripps. All have programs. Some of them sort of come and go in terms of the availability of these driver rehab programs, but the major hospital systems have these occupational therapists who are certified in driver rehab. So they can do an objective evaluation of how a person is doing, any modifications that might help make their driving safer. And the thing about getting evaluated through one of these resources is that they don't have the ability to revoke your driver's license, right? Of course, you can go get an on-the-road test by the DMV at any time, but if they feel that you're not safe, then they're gonna revoke your driving privileges. So a driver rehab specialist is sort of a third-party person who can be brought in, although you go to them, to evaluate whether or not a person has the capacity to drive safely. Usually these services are not covered by Medicare for people with dementia. And that's because dementia is a progressive condition. It's not true rehab, right? When these folks are working with someone who's had an injury or a stroke, and they are truly rehabilitating them to make their driving better, to help them regain those skills, Medicare and other types of health insurance will usually pay for that. But if you have a progressive type of dementia and you go to a driver rehabilitation specialist, it's possible that Medicare is not going to cover it because it's not a true rehabilitative process. If that doesn't make sense, just ask questions and we'll address them at the end. So the bottom line with all of this is that when a person represents a serious risk to themselves or to other people, right? Cars are dangerous things. Driving is a dangerous task. We just have to acknowledge it, right? This is a significant public health issue. They must stop driving one way or the other. If it's going to be voluntarily, right? That's terrific. That's a much less emotional, challenging situation. Sometimes we have to intervene in ways that are unpleasant because they're not going to give up driving voluntarily. So, but it has to happen. That's just the bottom line. So consider this, I'm sort of giving you permission. If you have to sort of kick that hornet's nest and open up this conversation, you are doing it for their well-being, you're doing it for your own well-being, and you're doing it for in the name of public safety as well. It's important. So encourage every one of us, as I mentioned, most of us are going to outlive our ability to drive safely. So I encourage everyone to engage in a little bit of sort of empathy building around what would it be like to stop driving, right? Think right now, if you are a driver right now and you had to stop right now, just you couldn't drive anymore as of today, think about what that would be like, right? Consider it for a moment. I'll ask you to reflect on this in a few different ways here. A few things that you can do to kind of develop this empathy muscle and help you prepare to stop driving, either for yourself or because you're going to be supporting someone else as they stop driving. Practice being a passenger. There are many of us, I absolutely am one of them, who are terrible passengers, right? I'm forever critiquing the way that my husband drives, telling him to slow down, you know, giving directions and giving my helpful feedback all the time. Right? Practice being a passenger. And if you're the person who does most of the driving in your household now, have the experience of being on the other side of that so you can get used to seeing what it's like to be driven around by someone else. Restrict your own driving, you know, combining your trips, reducing the amount of places you need to go, right? Carpooling with other people, or restrict if you feel you're concerned about your ability to drive at night, for example. I don't want to drive when we're out of town anymore, for example. Think about ways that you can restrict your driving, again, to kind of practice not being the primary driver in your household or in your life. That will require building sources of social support. If you don't, you know, this could be members of your family, it could be neighbors, members of social groups. Not everyone has that. This is why organizations like ElderHelp, like other local nonprofits, and I'll tell you about some of those. This is why those organizations are here, to be important sources of social support, to be part of everyone's safety net. Right? Something to be aware of is that there are things called driving agreements or family contracts that you can just, they're free, you download them off the internet. They're not legally binding, but these can be really helpful communication tools for, you know, if maybe I need to have a conversation with a member of my family about not driving, and we agree, he's doing okay for now, but we know the time is coming. We can have that conversation and come to an agreement that, you know, at your next birthday or the next time I hear something that sort of triggers me, triggers a red flag for me, the next time this happens, you can agree on what that is. This person sort of signs an agreement that they will get reevaluated, give up the car keys, whatever that might be. This is sort of a nice kind of gentle way to, we don't have to stop now, but we're preparing for that time that is coming ahead. Think about your options for outside help. I'm going to be covering some of the local resources here in a moment, but it's very important that this conversation not just be about you can't drive anymore, right? You want the conversation to be about what's going to happen instead, right? Because you're no longer going to be driving, I've done some research and here's what we're going to do instead, right? So everybody needs a personal transportation plan. Know about your public transit options, your paratransit options, and other volunteer services that are available to you should you not be able to drive. So again, in the interest of building our empathy muscle around the issue of driving, I ask you to reflect for a moment on this question. If you are a driver, what does driving mean to you? So I asked this question in a lot of classes over the years and in some webinars in recent years. And here are some of the most common answers that I receive, right? Driving means my independence, my freedom, my adulthood. It was the thing that, you know, when I was 16, 18, for some people who grew up in rural areas, they start driving when they're like 13 and 15, right? It was the thing that told me I was an adult. Right? It's part of my identity. This is really true in California in particular, but other places as well. It provides me access to where I want to go, where I need to go. It's a sign of my sort of general agency or ability. Not being able to drive, to me, may be an indication, right, that I've lost some personal power or agency. Autonomy is really sort of what underlies all of this. Acknowledge the fears that come along with not driving. Now, here's an important kind of thought exercise. Take a moment here and just think about, if you were never going to drive again right now, as of today, what would you worry about? What would you be fearful of? And here are some of the answers that I hear from folks. Let's see, there we go. Oops, okay. All right, I'm having a little remote control challenge here. The fears that I hear people have, and I certainly relate to a lot of these. If I were to not be driving anymore, I worry about being dependent on other people. I don't like that feeling. I worry about becoming isolated, a very real concern, right? And especially in places like San Diego County that are very large, very spread out. Many of the things we do, the places we go, the people we see, the things that keep us connected to our neighborhoods, our communities, our people are spread pretty far out. And if you can't drive, there is a very real risk of becoming isolated if you don't have transportation alternatives in place. Changing responsibilities. This is an important one. If you're a caregiver to someone else and you're encouraging them to stop driving, what's going to happen, right? In all likelihood, you're going to become the primary driver. Every time they need to go somewhere, right, they're going to call on you now. That's a real concern for a lot of people. Concern about being a burden, that loss of control or autonomy, not being as active. That kind of goes along with that isolation concern. And the loss of privacy is a really interesting one. I facilitated a support group for people with early dementia for many years, and this is something that came up a lot in that group. Just every time I want to go somewhere, if I can't drive, I say I need to go to the drugstore, right? People don't just say, sure, let's go. They say, what do you need, right? My business becomes everyone else's business. Okay, so think about that as you are preparing to support someone else in not driving. Try to think about those kind of impulses in how you can support them going forward. So very important to come to these conversations prepared, right? To go through those exercises before you have this conversation. Consider what driving means to that individual person. Consider what fears they may have about not driving anymore. Keep a detailed record of what you've observed, why you are concerned. Not to give them a big legal case, right? Not to make them feel bad about what happened, really for your own reference, so that you can come to that conversation prepared. Instead of saying, I just think you shouldn't be driving anymore, right? It's not a very strong argument. If you can say, there have been 3 incidents in the last month that caused me concern, right? And here's when they happened, here's what happened. That's going to be very helpful. Do your research, know what transportation alternatives are available before you have this conversation about not driving anymore. And if you need to get support, right? Many of us in the community, Alzheimer's San Diego is one such organization, but there are many other types of professionals you can work with who can meet with you as a family or just as a friend to have this conversation, to sort of be a professional third-party objective voice, to not to mediate officially, although that service is also available, but just to be sort of a source of objectivity and kind of balance in the conversation. If you need support around the conversation, don't hesitate to reach out for it. Again, I want to emphasize, you're probably concerned about hurting someone's feelings, about making them angry. It's a legitimate concern. People often do get their feelings hurt. People often do get angry. But I will tell you that in all my years of working in this field and working with many people through these conversations, I have never known a family that experienced a permanent rift because of the issue of driving. Right? These things will heal, and personal and public safety is, frankly, it's just more important than any one person's emotional state. So it's a little harsh, but that's where it's at. So what are these steps that we can take if we need to take action in supporting someone else who is not coming to the decision on their own to stop driving? You can make that request with the DMV. You may be able to limit their access to the car or to the car keys, sort of keeping it out of sight, out of mind, moving the keys, parking the car around the corner so it's not sitting right in the driveway in their view, for example. You may not be able to sell the car. It is the person's personal property in many cases. So depending on your relationship with them or what authority you have, you may or may not be able to actually get rid of the car. But there might be ways that you could disable it or, again, make it just not visible or accessible to the person. In extreme cases, you can contact law enforcement in the same way that if you had concerns about a person who was driving under the influence, right, you just call right in that moment and, 911, here's where the person left from, here's where I think they were going, here's the car that they are in. You could do that with a person who's living with dementia that you are concerned about, but it's a pretty extreme intervention, of course, that we want to avoid if at all possible. So the bottom line to taking all of these actions is to plan ahead and know the transportation alternatives first. So we have a lot of what are called demand responsive services out there, meaning I call, I make a request, and somebody comes, right? Rather than public transit, which is on its own schedule. Taxis, Uber, Lyft, there's sort of a companion program called GoGo Grandparent, which is kind of Uber, Lyft for people who don't use smartphones. It operates through the telephone. And then, of course, we have our MTS paratransit system, MTS Access, here in San Diego County. These are the red and white buses that pick up, they do door-to-door curbside assistance to people with disabilities that make it difficult for them to use public transportation. And memory loss, cognitive changes are an eligible disability. So the paratransit system is available Nonprofit and volunteer programs, I'll give you a couple of examples of those. Activity and location specific services, meaning if you love to go to the YMCA, if you have a doctor that you see regularly, ask that organization if they have their own transportation service or a preferred or recommended transportation service. You'd be surprised how many do, but they don't advertise it. There's actually quite a lot of them. Of course, you can always hire private transportation services, drivers, but also you can use home care services to provide transportation services as well. This is a sort of a nice way that a lot of people use local non-medical in-home care services. And then of course, there's us. Families, friends, other members of your natural support system can be part of your personal transportation plan as well. So here, I won't spend a lot of time on this because you're going to get these slides. So I'll just sort of tell you what's here and you'll know that it's there and you can look through these resources on your own. But I've listed for you a few resources for local transportation. MTS's Access Program. FACT is our Facilitating Access to Transportation. It's a really robust transportation database. You sort of plug in an address, here's where I am, here's where I'm going, and it'll give you all of your options for private and public transportation services. Ride Fact is a subset of FACT just for people who are over age 60. So their resources are on their website as well. And JFS also has a suite of different transportation services, the Jewish Family Service, on the go. And don't forget, I know that Carrie had it on screen at the beginning of the program. ElderHelp has their Seniors A Go-Go transportation program. I like the way they call it their door-through-door service, transportation service. I don't know the state of it right now, post-pandemic. So maybe Carrie, at the end, you can update us on that. But that is another great resource that we have here in San Diego County. Here's where you can find those occupational therapists who do driver evaluations. The American Occupational Therapy Association has a nationwide database, but these are the two hospitals that currently have operating driver rehab programs here in San Diego County, Scripps and Sharp. General driver safety information, the DMV. So here's where I reference the Form 699, the request for driver reevaluation. They have a lot of great resources in the sort of senior tab of the California DMV website, a senior driver guide, contact information for the ombudsman, and much more. By the way, I failed to mention before, I know sometimes there are concerns about being called back in for that written test or that driving test. Do be aware that written tests can absolutely be adapted and modified for people with disabilities. So if that is a concern for you, right, that the person has difficulty reading, has difficulty with language, vision problems, for example, not general eyesight problems, but reading issues, other issues that might prevent them from taking the traditional written test, it can be adapted. So you just have to request that in advance. This is one of the reasons we have those driver safety offices that are much more accessible and easy to use. AARP has a great set of driver safety resources. The AAA, also really robust senior program there, and the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety's website is a terrific resource as well. Couple advocacy organizations, Freewheeling After 60. This is a local gerontologist who does personalized transportation planning for people who are thinking about a time ahead that they're not going to be driving, and then a few others listed here where you can get statistics and information on driver safety. Sometimes, you know, some people like to have a lot of facts before they come to a conversation, or I, as a person living with memory loss, I may need you to present me with a pretty good case, right? So if a person really responds to information and facts like that, these websites have a lot of good information. Of course, at Alzheimer's San Diego, we are here to be a support. We don't have a transportation service, but we can connect you to information about local Volunteer Driver Coalition, local transportation alternatives. We can connect you with organizations like ElderHelp and Jewish Family Service who do offer volunteer or sliding scale fee-based transportation options. But we also can just generally be a support to people around all of the issues related to memory loss, support groups, education, one-on-one consultation with dementia experts, the facilitation of family meetings, right? Whatever it is that you need. If we don't do it, we probably know someone who does. So just reach out and let us know. That's it. Carrie, have there been any questions coming in?
Well, thank you so much, Amy. I know I say this every time, but I learned so much
Great, I'm
from
glad.
your presentation. So I'm hopeful that everybody else did as well and kind of took away some of those nuggets. I think it was really valuable to have the information on how it works with physicians and the DMV, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about that process.
Yes, yes.
So thank you for covering those.
Sure, great, good.
Let me check to see if there are any questions. And while I do that, I know Amy mentioned ElderHelp Seniors A Go-Go transportation program, and it is still operating with restrictions. We are focusing on medical related appointments at this point, so not yet going to social activities, but we're just kind of revisiting that process and also making sure that we have volunteers available to be able to offer that. So let me go to the questions. Okay, so one question came in: if a loved one with dementia gets into an accident, could the family be sued for knowing and allowing the loved one to drive?
That is a good, honestly, I can't say confidently that I know the answer to that question. I don't believe so. But I honestly can't say that with total confidence. This would probably be a good question for an elder law attorney, actually. So my gut tells me no, but I can't say that with total confidence.
I'm sure there's so many variables with that too.
Yeah, and also like what your actual relationship is to the person. If you're that person's conservator, right, then I imagine you have some serious culpability there. If you're just a spouse, a friend, a neighbor, another family member, I have to imagine your responsibility, your risk is much lower there.
That makes sense. So kind of a part two on that question, could there be any issues with our auto insurance carrier if they were not aware of the diagnosis and the loved one gets into an accident?
Yes, as I mentioned, if the person has received either a diagnosis or has heard directly from their doctor that they shouldn't be driving, whether they remember that conversation happening or not, that's the trick. If they have gotten that directive from a doctor, it's in their medical record, and absolutely an insurance company can and often will refuse to cover that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, a question you had mentioned about a couple of the local hospitals that offer driver rehab specialists. Do you know if Kaiser has any of the occupational therapists or
not to my knowledge? So what I should say is Kaiser doesn't have a dedicated driver rehab program the way that Scripps and Sharp do and Tri-City sometimes does. But Kaiser certainly has a robust stroke rehab program. They have occupational therapists, so they may have individual people who do this, but they just don't have a dedicated program for it. So certainly, if you're a Kaiser member, ask your doctor about it.
Great suggestion. And there's this isn't a question, it's more of a comment about the fact that when you're giving up driving now, it's so much easier to do with the different programs that are available, like Lyft and Uber and all of the other ones, which is a very good point, I think.
Absolutely, and I love to hear that. It's really true. We've come a long way. First of all, our public transit system has improved a lot in recent years here in San Diego County, but even outside of that, the paratransit system and all these private services have made it a lot easier to live without driving. Yes.
Okay, so this question is regarding a resident who lives in a retirement community. Okay. So if we know a resident has dementia, has been diagnosed with dementia, and as a retirement community, we're all aware that this person is driving, he and his wife through San Diego. It sounds like the primary care physician is also aware, and the DMV has renewed his license. Can you please advise?
Yeah, I would say start with that request for reevaluation. Anybody can complete one of these, and if you indicate that if you're a professional and you have some firsthand knowledge, or if you're a professional or you live near or with this person and you have a lot of firsthand knowledge, that's going to be kind of a stronger argument. So you might want to submit one of those requests for reevaluation from the DMV. But again, I want to emphasize that just having the diagnosis isn't enough people can certainly legally keep driving with a diagnosis of dementia if the DMV has retested them and determined that they're still safe to do so.
Gotcha. Okay. One question about the Seniors A Go-Go program. Unfortunately, it's not available in Ramona, but as Amy mentioned, there are other volunteer driving programs. So going through facilitated access to coordinated transportation, you can actually get a list of what volunteer driving programs are available in particular zip codes. So I would definitely encourage you to check out their website, and I'll send all of that information as she mentioned.
Great.
Okay, another question. This person's doctor has sent them for future evaluation, and this came positive as they can continue driving. And now he said that I can drive, but the DMV notification was sent to me. What should I do now? So it sounds like the doctor sent the person for future evaluation, and they said you can continue driving, but the DMV notification has now been sent. So what should they do in that circumstance?
If the DMV notification was sent, you just sort of wait. Honestly, you wait to hear what the DMV is gonna do. The DMV may not respond at all because they may also have gotten word from the doctor that the person is safe to drive, or the DMV may request that you come in and do a road test or a written test or both. So hard to predict, what it is that they might do. But the fact that the doctor has said you're still safe to drive doesn't mean the DMV is going to agree with that, right? So it's kind of like it only goes in one direction. So the doctor says you can't drive, they can't revoke your driver's license just by saying that. But a doctor saying that you are okay to drive doesn't override the DMV's decision either. So I'd say you're kind of in a holding pattern right now. You wait to see if the DMV is going to call you in for a reevaluation.
Okay. Thank you. And then the only last question that is coming up is in regards to, I think the insurance again, if you're familiar with getting an umbrella policy for added financial protection.
I don't know. This would be a question for your insurance agent or an advisor. But I mean, certainly I'm one of those people. I'm all about being overinsured, and so I generally lean toward sure, why not? But I can't advise really one way or the other on that. But certainly that is a thought, right? Purchasing an umbrella policy can help cover lots of different things in terms of not just related to driver safety or driver injury or property damage, but lots of other things. But yeah, that's a question for an insurance specialist, not for me, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thank you. And it doesn't look like there are any other questions coming in, but I would encourage any of you, as Amy has mentioned too, Alzheimer's San Diego is available to help kind of navigate that process. So if you do have any follow-up questions, you can feel free to reach out to either of our organizations. We're always happy to connect you with the right resource. I did want to mention we have another webinar coming up actually next week, so 1 week from today, and we'll be having a speaker from SDG&E talk about energy tips and solutions. They will also be talking about how to prevent you and your loved ones from being victims of scams related to SDG&E. So I think that is, I'm looking forward to them sharing more information about that, because we've been hearing more and more about scams coming out and related to SDG&E. So that will be helpful to prevent us all from becoming victims. So I encourage anybody to register for that. You can do so through our website. And then for general inquiries about our programs, if you have any other questions about our Seniors A Go-Go or any other services, feel free to contact our main phone number, 619-284-9281. You can send an email through info@elderhelpofsandiego.org if you would rather do that. If you want to be notified of all of our upcoming family caregiver webinars, or if you have any family caregiving specific questions, feel free to contact me directly, and my email is on there. But we're so appreciative, Amy, of your time today and sharing your wealth of knowledge as always. So
it's really
thank
a
you.
pleasure. Thanks for great questions, and again, thanks for bringing us in on this important topic. I appreciate it.
All right, and for everybody who is in attendance, thank you so much for joining today. We hope you learned more for yourself and for your loved ones. And if you do have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. But we'll be in touch, and I will certainly share the recorded version of this webinar as well as the PowerPoint so that you have access to all of those resources that Amy included as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
Bye.
All right, take care.